We're going to go over what is a master plan. Some of you may remember from 2004 what the master plan was, but for those of you that don't, it's not in your everyday repertoire. We're going to go over a little bit about that. The survey findings that was sent out through Nixle, the draft vision statement that we've come up with from those survey findings, as well as some key issues and opportunities that we've already discovered. A little bit of Zoom 101. To use the chat feature, just click on the chat box. Should be at the bottom of your screen, and it'll say chat. And you can put your questions or comments and any thoughts that you have throughout the presentation. And we'll either address them during the Q&A period or also in our small breakout rooms. A little bit of troubleshooting. If you're calling in and able to join through Zoom, please do so. You can register at the link www.mapc.ma/forum registration. Again, the meeting is being recorded and will be available on Cable 8 in a few days, so you can make a little highlights reel. And if you're having any trouble, we have a hotline for you to call, which is 617-933-0713. And please be patient with the technology. It's everybody's using it, so everybody knows what a great asset as well as sometimes a hindrance it can be. Also, we reserve the right to expel anyone at any point should they disrupt the meeting for any reason. Okay, some introductions. Who is doing this? Well, along with you all that have already provided 1,300 responses, go you guys. Kevin Sweet, the town administrator, and myself are also helping out. We're the background. And also we have a really great group of talented volunteers in town. Stephanie Duquette, Diane Glass, George Labonte, Jerry McGovern, Lawrence Johnson, Jeffrey Plant, Steve Schwarm, Alan Selling, Everett Skinner Jr., Jeff Spratt, and Selena Zabrowski. All, I'm sure if you know are your neighbors, friends, they'd be more than happy to talk to you a little bit more about the master plan. And as well as, last but not least, our MAPC staff, our regional planning staff, Ralph Wilmer, Ella Weiss, and Carolina Preto. And wonderful helps in all of this. And they are a big part of what this virtual public hearing that we're having today, forum that we're having tonight. Couldn't have done it without you guys. Okay, a little bit about what is a master plan. Some of you, again, may be part of the 2004, remember it from then, but if not, I'll give a little bit of an overview. So a master plan is a strategic framework that guides the future physical and economic development of a town or city based on the community's vision and goals. The master plan provides the town with a vision for its future, goals and strategies to capitalize on opportunities, an action plan for policy programs and public investment. It does not stop development projects, increase taxes, or go into a granular sort of analyzing individual sites. So even if it's not mentioned in a master plan, that doesn't mean you can't also do it. So if the electric go-karts weren't mentioned in the master plan, we still would be able to have them and get supercharged. World's largest indoor track. Yes, win for us. And also when you're planning for your future, you can't do that without knowing what you've done in the past. So we had looked at all of these other previously done plans and taken that and incorporated it into this new one as well to see what we've done right, what we need to work on, and see if that still aligns with any of our goals and vision now. So what is included in this vision of tomorrow? Well, a full master plan has typically these 10 elements. And we chose to focus on, in phase 1, the community vision, housing, and economic development. Because those are really the foundations, a lot of the other elements. Where are we in this plan? We are in the public forum. We've already gone through steering committees. We've done the townwide survey that's still open till October 1st. So if you haven't done so, please fill it out. We have a draft vision statement that we'll go over tonight, and then the public forum. And we hope to have everything done by June 2021. A couple more surveys in between. We'll come up with some draft housing and economic development goals, and then we'll come up with the actions on those. And you'll be there with us every step of the way. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ella Weiss, Senior Planner at MAPC.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for adding a little comedy to what's a difficult Zoom meeting, or just it's hard to have this over Zoom. Thank you all so much for joining. Once again, my name is Ella, and I'm from the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, or MAPC, here with a nice, strong team of colleagues. Carolina is on, and she'll be leading some of the meeting. Sasha has done all of the magical tech work with her skills. Ralph, a principal planner, will be leading a breakout room. We have Yolando providing the hotline help, and Christian as well. So thanks again for having us help the town and you all design this master plan. So we wanted to present on the survey findings. So likely, hopefully, all of you have seen the survey and probably filled it out. If you haven't, it is still open until October 1st. And one of my MAPC colleagues will send in the chat how to access the survey so that you can respond to it if you have not already. I'll go over some of the major findings, but if you'd like to read all of the survey responses, we welcome you to do that, and we'll post those after October 1st, so later this week or next week. While I'm presenting, we want to make this as interactive as possible. We're trying to be creative within the constraints that we're all living under. So please add questions in the chat. They can be technical questions, or they can be things that surprise you. You know, maybe if we were in a room together, you would ooh and ah at some of these findings. Whatever it is, feel free to express yourself and ask questions in the chat, and we'll have time for question and answer. So we'll get to those. Okay, so we started distributing the survey several weeks ago, and have had great response rates. So more than 1,300 people have already responded to this survey. 1,000 of those were fully filled out. That's basically means that 1 in 10 residents responded to the survey, which is amazing. Rachel was really influential in spreading the survey. So we had a postcard sent to every household. This is pretty rare these days, and just a wonderful asset that the planning department was able to do that within Wrentham. So thank you, Rachel. It was posted in local newspapers, hard copies at town hall. The steering committee members who were introduced earlier and will be leading the breakout rooms did some targeted outreach to key community leaders and institutions in town. There were emails to community leaders, and through social media as well. So before we dig into the results, who actually took the survey? So the next few slides will be a series of charts. So most of the survey respondents have lived in Wrentham for a good long time, more than 10 years. Only, around 10% have lived here for less than 3 years. So it certainly represents those who have been in Wrentham for a while, and maybe underrepresents those who've been here less, although it's hard to compare to the overall population. So some demographics that are are easier to compare. In the green here is the survey respondents, and the blue is the actual full population in Wrentham. So we use this to this comparison to show whose voices are we hearing through this survey? Is it everyone's voices, or is it kind of skewed to certain demographics? So if you look in the middle here, you'll see that blue representing the actual population is a lot bigger than the little green line for renters. So that means that the survey underrepresents renters. So there's a lot more renters in the overall population than among the respondents to the survey. So the steering committee is well aware of this, and we tried to mail a postcard to every household, but we will be more intentional about reaching out to the residents who rent so that we're not underrepresenting their views in the rest of the master plan. So if you have any ideas about how to better reach renters in town, please add them to the chat and we'll capture it and revise our outreach strategy going forward. Similarly, there were far fewer survey respondents making less than 50,000 and making less than 100,000 than in the overall population. So the survey underrepresents lower income residents. And again, we want to have more intentional outreach to those residents so that we do a better job next time in making sure that their voices are heard. So again, if you have any ideas about how to do that, please add that to the chat. And then in terms of race, it's harder to know which groups are overrepresented or underrepresented because so many people in responding to the survey chose to prefer not to answer. So it's kind of hard to compare. So what are some of the findings? So as you might recall, one of the questions was about what are the greatest strengths in Wrentham? And there was a multiple choice question. So all of the choices are down the left-hand side of your screen, and the proportion of respondents are shown in the bar chart. So it's pretty clear that a lot of people agree that some of the main strengths are that it's good for families and the schools and education. And then there's also some consensus around there's a strong sense of community and that the open space, natural resources, and farmland are a strength. And then it can be interesting also when you look at this summary to notice the things that are at the bottom of the list. So that few people consider a strength, like the premium outlets, or maybe surprisingly, the proximity to jobs. We also asked about more kind of big picture, what are the values, what are the aspirations for Wrentham? And again, there was pretty strong consensus around being community oriented and support for Wrentham becoming more welcoming and walkable. And then lower down the list, fiscally responsible, rural, charming. So I wanted to mention, I just added these brackets here to kind of draw your attention to what seem to be the winners, but you can see for yourself what the results are and kind of draw the line of which gained the most support. You know, it's all relative. We all just look at this in comparison to each other. So because the survey underrepresents a few demographic groups, the steering committee decided to focus in on the survey responses from those specific demographic groups so that we could really try to understand as best we can. So this chart shows the most popular aspirations among survey respondents who identify as African American, Asian American, and Latinx. So it's very similar to the overall findings. A strong priority for community-oriented and welcoming. But you see here that healthy and active are aspirations that are more popular among this group of our neighbors. We also focused in on the survey responses from our neighbors who make less than $50,000 a year. And you see the aspirations change a little bit. So rural becomes important, and importantly affordable becomes more important, and this choice about rooted, which was connected to the history, land, and place, becomes more important as well. I also wanted to note that there weren't a lot of survey respondents within these particular demographic groups, so I don't want to provide like too much information that could be identifying, but there was very little to no overlap. So this slide showing the responses from African American, Asian American, and Latinx respondents are a different group than this group. There is some overlap between the respondents who rent and the respondents with less than $50,000 in income. So within this group of renters, affordability is really important, as well as health. And fiscally responsible and rural, community-oriented, those are some themes that we've seen a few times here now. There was also a question about what's the most meaningful place in Wrentham. So the downtown and the town common seems pretty overwhelmingly popular, as well as the conservation areas. So interestingly, there had been a question about what are Wrentham's strengths, and the downtown wasn't listed. It was pretty low on the list, actually. And yet downtown is a meaningful place. So I don't know exactly why there's that disparity in answers, but it's interesting to note that it wasn't chosen as a strength, but it is a meaningful place. So there's some kind of heart connection, it seems, with the downtown. So in terms of improvements, this was another multiple choice question on the survey. Lots of support for making improvements to make the town more walkable and bikeable throughout town. So there was also a choice to say more walkable and bikeable just in the downtown, but that wasn't as popular. Survey respondents want to be more bikeable and walkable everywhere. They want to protect more open space from development. They want more shops and services downtown specifically. So there was a choice to have more shops and services throughout town. That wasn't as popular, but really more shops and services downtown, as well as more trails and parks. This was another question that we zoomed in on particular demographics, since they were underrepresented in the overall findings. So similarly for respondents who identify as African American, Asian American, and Latinx, becoming more walkable and bikeable is still a high priority. But I really want to draw everyone's attention to the fact that something that hadn't been a high priority in the overall results is now for the people of color in town, or the people of color who took the survey. And that is making it easier to participate in and influence local decision making becomes now among the highest priority improvements that the master plan can address. This zooms in into the data from respondents who make less than 50K. Again, making it more walkable and bikeable throughout town is the highest priority. So that seems to be a theme that runs across all of the survey respondents, as well as protecting more open space. And then you see here, reducing the cost of housing or making it more affordable in town is a high priority. Again, for respondents who rent, reducing cost of housing is a high priority, along with protecting open space and making it more walkable and bikeable throughout town. Interestingly, this choice, easier to participate in and influence local decision making, is not as high as it was for the survey respondents who identify as African American, Asian American, or Latinx. So then there was a question that was open-ended, and there's 1,000 responses. So I encourage you all to look at those. It's really interesting to see what your neighbors want for the future of town. We tried to analyze it based on some themes, and there were the same themes that came up through the multiple choice questions. So improving downtown, more small businesses, people talked about protecting open space, lots of visions about more sidewalks and bike lanes, increasing diversity and affordability, strengthening the community and providing social events. There are visions about fiscal responsibility and responsible management of taxes in the tax base, and providing services and facilities to seniors. So just to show you a quick snippet of some of the visions that our neighbors provided through this open-ended question. So I'll just read some here. An historic, charming open space town, strong community spirit, preservation of natural spaces, more businesses downtown. Safe place that has natural areas for walking and biking, continued great educational system and strong community, more diversity. Again, I welcome you to read through the whole list of visions that folks provided. We also asked a question about the 2004 vision. So Wrentham has a vision from 2004. Does it still serve its purpose? Maybe we can just recycle it. It seems like there's a lot of support for updating it. So, you know, we gave the option, nothing, I like the 2004 vision as it is, and few people chose that. So they want to see a new vision, particularly that adds to the existing one, references to public infrastructure and a walkable downtown with a variety of shops. And then the 2004 vision also talked about directing growth to existing village centers. So we wanted to revisit that idea. And there's a lot of support for directing growth downtown and along Route 1. So with that, I'll open up to question and answer. I can stop sharing my screen too.
So just looking into the chat, if people have any questions, we'd love to hear from you about any of the presentation that Ella gave or that Rachel was cluing us in. So if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat directly, and we'll go from there. So far, we haven't seen any questions. So it's perfect.
I guess it was just a perfect presentation, Rachel. Way to go. Anything that I missed, Rachel, or the members of the steering committee?
I'd like to thank you for doing the work to highlight the ones who are underrepresented. I think that was very valuable.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. I think that was Steve who spoke. Everett was the brain mastermind behind that one. So thank you, Everett, for that. So there's a question here from Yael Zacone-Burke. Feel free to correct me, Yael. What percentage of the town's population are African-American or Latin or Latinx?
Great. So I don't actually remember the exact number, but I think it's 94% white. And I'm looking at the chart here. I think it's about 2% Latinx and 2% African American and 1% Asian American, and then other.
Great, thank you for that. There's a question here from Jennifer Kosh. What are the next steps after this?
Glad you asked, and we'll surely be covering that. So based on these survey results and your feedback on them this evening, we will be, we've prepared a vision statement, and so we'll present that next and get your feedback on that, and then have done some existing conditions analysis. So based on the survey and the existing conditions analysis and this meeting, we will revise the vision statement that the steering committee and we developed, summarize the existing conditions and the survey responses, and that'll provide kind of the groundwork, the landscape to start digging into housing and economic development strategies. So that's the next phase of this work, is really focusing our outreach on leaders and folks who are particularly affected by housing and economic development, and then coming up with policy strategies and actions focused on those two topics.
Great, thank you for clarifying that. There's a question here from Melissa. So she says, Yom Kippur ended at 6:31. Do you know what population, what percent of the population in our town is Jewish? Melissa asks, she missed the presentation, so will it be posted online?
That's a really good point, and I apologize for that. I overlooked the date of Yom Kippur, and I take responsibility for that, so I'm sorry. I don't know what population of the town is Jewish, and I actually don't know where we would find that data, but if someone else knows, that would be a great thing to add. Yes, the presentation will be publicly accessible, as well as the recording of the meeting. All of that is on the project website, and actually recordings of all of the steering committee meetings that we've had thus far, which have been 4, are accessible on the town webpage, and we can post that on the chat for you.
And I just put the link to the master plan webpage in the chat. So if people want to take a look at it or haven't had a chance to look at it, you can take a look there. Any other questions for right now?
Hello, this is Jeff Plant. Can you just maybe let the folks know what the Cable 8 process will be? I know you mentioned that it's going to be aired in a couple days. Is this going to be something that's going to be on for a little while so that people who are not able to participate in this public forum, will still be able to get to it, 2, 3, 4 days, a week down the road?
That's a great question that I knew the answer to. And if the rep from Cable 8 wants to chime in on the chat, that is appreciated. I'm not sure exactly when they'll air it, but this recording of the video will be publicly accessible for the next 8 months on the project webpage. Okay.
And then maybe along that lines, Rachel, will there be some sort of information that can be posted so that people know where they can, again, I'm thinking the electronic board out in front of town hall and stuff, but just to let people know that it is available on Cable 8. They can go to the websites, to get all of this information.
Yeah, outside of, we have the link off of the main page of the Wrentham town page. I can also put something on the planning page. I'm limited to what I can put on the main page of the town, as I do not have authority for that. But whatever I can do within my parameters, I will do to get that information out there.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for making a note of that. There's another question here from Melissa that says, who authorizes the use of our town commons?
I'll let you take that one, Rachel. I'm not sure. That's not something that the master plan will cover, that kind of operational issue, likely, but I'm not sure the answer to it.
I think it is Board of Selectmen that authorize the use of that space.
Hi, Rachel. It's Stephanie.
Hi, Stephanie. Yes, please
Hi.
chime in it.
Yeah, they can contact Town Hall, the Board of Selectmen's office. There's forms that people can request to use the town common.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Melissa says, I've always wondered how the nativity scene is able to be in the gazebo, for example. So maybe a note about diversity of religion, perhaps. Another question from Ken here. Are there any historical restrictions in place for downtown or common development? Great question, Ken.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question.
Hold on, let me look. Or common development. So there would be no development in the common because it is town-owned land. Downtown, if any of the buildings want to be changed, they do have to go through historical commission. There's usually a review for that process. But we do have, I think it was 2 years ago, we did a rezoning, and so there are a little bit more requirements as to how the aesthetics of those buildings are.
Yeah, I'd be happy to look more, into that question more as we focus more on strategies and actions, but we're kind of still on the high level of the vision.
Great, thank you, Ken. Let us know if that answered your question. Melissa says here, is a new direction or more active role for the Housing Authority anticipated? Do you mean a new direction or active role in this process, or what do you mean by that, Melissa? Can you elaborate a little bit? I will say I know that we had wanted to reach out more directly to the Housing Authority in terms of this process, and in terms of what Ella had mentioned about reaching out to renters and others that may not necessarily be represented in the survey. That's something we're gonna hopefully be following up on. But feel free to elaborate a little bit more, Melissa, if we haven't answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I know that it's a small housing authority because of course it's a small town. I kind of was just wondering, with everything going on, would they maybe take a more proactive role and seek out grants and options and expanded roles or whatnot? And I was a little confused about community participation because I know although there's a board of governors, board of directors, whatnot, they have their services, oh, sorry, brain freeze, their meetings, like a meeting, whatever, open to the public, any citizens welcome to come, but they are somehow oddly Tuesdays at 9 o'clock in the morning, once a month. And so I actually arranged my schedule at work so I could Zoom in, because I realized that part, this last month, and it was canceled because I didn't have a quorum. Well, okay, but how would presumably public citizenry know this? You know what I mean? I'm just very confused, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I don't know anything about them. I just wanted to think of a way to get involved in my town, and housing has always been my passion. So I started with the Housing Authority, and I've been very confused. I've had nice conversations with Ashley, I think is her name. She's been lovely by text, but I still really, it's just, I find it odd. Like, who has a meeting open to the public at Tuesdays at 9 o'clock in the morning? Like, who do they think is gonna come if you're not retired? I don't know. It's odd.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Melissa. And I'm not sure to what extent, you know, the planning department has been working with the Housing Authority. Maybe Rachel, you can elaborate a little bit more on that. But I agree with you. I think thinking about accessibility and how people can plug in. I think in terms of outreach and the issues that we're going to be talking about tonight, at least we'll have a good opportunity to plug into topics that at least this first phase of the master plan will cover. And we'll get really into the conversation and into the topics. But sure. I definitely agree with you thinking about how else we can connect. And I don't know if there's other listservs or ways that people plug in the town website, obviously. But Rachel, I don't know if you have other thoughts.
Hi, yes, I know Ashley, she's fairly new, probably within the past 2 years, but
yeah.
So she's still getting her feet under her. There's a lot to sort of corral, even though it is a small town. So I know that she does want to actively pursue grants and other things that I think she's been with the CPC on for some projects, as well as they just did hire Susan Jacobson, who is very active. She's the housing coordinator in Norfolk and works very closely with their affordable housing trust. And so Wrentham just was able to get her on a part-time basis. And she is very knowledgeable in affordable housing and all things affordable housing. So she is definitely a great resource that we just added to our repertoire. So stay on the lookout.
Yeah, thank you for that, Melissa. Stephanie Bird asked a great question. How frequently will we be having these meetings and update the community? Also, will the meetings be for the steering committee be accessible live?
Great, yeah, so all the steering committee meetings are publicly noticed and accessible. We've had some members of the public join for 1 or 2, but it's been pretty low attendance, so strongly encourage folks to come. We'll likely only have 1 or 2 more steering committee meetings, or I guess there'll be more than that, but I think we're only scoped for a few more. but there will be, and then there will be one other public forum similar to this. But in addition to that, to really gain feedback focused on housing and economic development, we'll be doing community outreach and having stakeholder interviews and hopefully focus groups and maybe a survey targeted to on housing and economic development. So if you're interested in those topics, please let us know, maybe add your name to the chat so that we know to reach out to you about those.
Another thing to mention is that on the website, you can sign up for updates for this process. So I highly encourage everybody to sign up, and I'm sure maybe perhaps Sasha could put just a reminder link to the website. So I think that will be another way to follow up as well. Yael asks, what are the steps between vision and reality, and who makes those decisions? Thanks for that question, Yael. I think that's a very common question, and something that we, it's definitely a combination of things. So Ella, I don't know if you want to start us off with that.
Yeah, and then Rachel, please add on. So that's kind of like the art of the plan, right? So we want to write a vision, establish a vision that is shared. So it has to be like general enough that there's some consensus behind it, but it provides some kind of useful information and inspiration about where we're going. And then we design goals. And for this project, it'll be around housing and economic development first. And so those goals will be tied to this shared vision, and then strategies are a little bit more specific. So sometimes it gets a little bit harder to all agree on, and then actions. And so it's up to us to write the plan well so that it can be implemented. Like, that's the job. So we will assign an entity for each action that's responsible for implementing that. So it might be the planning board, or it might be the Conservation Commission, depending on the action. And we usually give a rough estimate of time that it'll take. This is a short-term action, so it'll take a year, or maybe this is really, this is about building a coalition or to have to seek grant funding first. So it could be up to 5 years. So it's a great question, and kind of everyone is part of that, but certainly the town planner has a major role in it. MAPC just helps shepherd this planning process. And so it's part of our job to make the plan actually implementable, so it's valuable, but we're not usually part of that, the implementation.
And then just to add to that, Yael, and if you think about stakeholders, so of course there's the planning department, our role as facilitating the process, and then the master plan committee members who are all here today to help steward that process and make sure that we're asking critical questions and including things that need to be included for the process. And then, the final decision will be, back in Rachel's hands and the committee members to finalize for that piece as well. So again, like, your input sort of is folded into that process, if that makes sense. But if you need further clarification, let us know. Rachel, did you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, and I would say it's kind of like your work plan or your 5-year plan for if you do that personally. But this will be each, like Ella and Caroline were saying, is that each section that we're going to have will have sort of tasks for different committees and boards, and that committee and board can take that as their sort of work plan to start working and pushing that forward. Sometimes you see in some communities they have a special committee created, the Master Plan Implementation Committee, which will check in maybe once or twice a year to move those projects forward. So all of those are great ideas, and thank you.
Other members of the Master Plan Committee, feel free to chime in if you have any other comments as questions are asked. Everett, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I noticed that there were 2 questions about other land in the downtown. They're probably talking about what used to be Crosby Val. That land has been rezoned by the town a couple of years ago now. And it does allow for mixed use down there, housing as well as retail development. And if I have missed anything, Rachel, you can fill in. The other thing that we've done recently is we've also changed the zoning in 2 places as far as senior housing. The town now allows so-called in-law apartments attached to an existing dwelling by going through the zoning board. And we have created a new senior living bylaw that has to go through the planning board to get any kind of development. So we've taken those actions, which were part of the 2004 plan, and they're now in place. And I think we've already had 2 hearings on, or we're about to have 2 hearings on the senior apartments, senior living attached to a single family home.
Thank you for that detail. Appreciate that. Ken here says, are there any nearby towns we're looking to do for inspiration? We're looking for inspiration or what to do or what not to do in terms of the master plan, I'm assuming.
That's a great question. We love any suggestions that you have. Please let us know, both for inspiration and things not to do. We heard there were definitely some survey responses about Franklin. I don't know if it's specific to the planning, but maybe some of the development that's happened. But we haven't looked specifically to any other towns. MAPC works with the 101 towns and cities of the region, so we have lots of varied experience. So in working together with the town, we bring some of that inspiration, but we aren't looking to anything specific. But please add to the chat if you have any suggestions. And I think that maybe we can, these have been great questions, and it looks like maybe there's some more. Please add your questions to the chat. I think since we have more material to get through and we have specific breakout rooms so that everyone's voice can be heard, we can move on to the next segment of the agenda.
The other thing I'll make a note is, you know, for additional questions we don't get to tonight, we can figure out a way to, we typically, you know, do a Q&A and post that online to the website. And that's a pretty easy thing for us to do.
That's a great idea. Okay. So with that, I'll start sharing the screen again. So based on all of these survey responses, the steering committee and MAPC in the town has worked together to draft a vision statement. So I'm going to share that now. Okay, so again, the idea of the vision statement is to provide inspiration, some kind of shared understanding of where the town wants to be in 10 years. And this will guide the development of strategies and actions, policies and investments, and the decision-making of leaders in town. So I'm going to read it aloud and then give you some time to read yourself. And then we're going to have some interactive polling so that people can give their feedback on the vision statement, and we get kind of a taste for how this is resonating with folks. And then we're going to have breakout rooms for further discussion. So based on all those survey responses, this is what we've drafted. Wrentham is a charming town, proud of its downtown and open spaces, and a great place to raise a family. More than 1,000 of us have come together through a public process to set a vision for the future. By 2030, we aspire to continue to cultivate a community-oriented and welcoming culture, protect more farmland and open space for cultural heritage, scenic beauty, habitat, and water quality, become more walkable and bikeable with sidewalks and trails, strengthen the downtown with more mom and pop shops, small businesses, homes, and places to gather, maintain the rural landscape by promoting sustainable land use patterns and shifting away from sprawl development, encourage diversity with a mix of housing options affordable to young adults, families, households with lower incomes, and seniors, ensure fiscal responsibility while maintaining high-quality infrastructure and services. To effectively pursue and strike a balance between these goals, we encourage transparent governance, strong civic engagement, and volunteerism. So I'm just going to let that slide sit there for a second so you can skim it over again.
And as a reminder, all the drafts and will be on the website as well.
And then we'll ask some questions. Okay, Carolina, handing over to you to lead that.
Awesome. So we're going to be using Poll Everywhere. So if you haven't gotten a chance to use this online polling tool, Sasha will put the link to the poll in the chat. So feel free to click that. And you can see here that there is a question about what changes you might recommend for the vision statement. So as you are clicking there, if you have any issues getting to the page, please let us know in the chat. We'll help direct you. Take some notes and put your responses in, and love to hear from you. So just take a moment. You'll go to pollev.com/MAPC poll and open up a new window, and you'll be able to insert your thoughts on that. So we'll just take a couple of minutes to do that. So the first question, and I don't know if folks can see the first one, you can enter here your answer. And the question is, does the draft vision reflect the shared vision for the future? Answer A is yes, it's great, it's perfect. Yes, B is yes, but it could use some edits. C is no, but it got some things right. Or D, we need to go back to the drawing board. And Ella, do you mind if I answer Yael's question real quick in the chat? I just see it here and I'd like to respond.
Yeah, please.
Okay, great. So Yael says, your definition of diversity only includes economic and age diversity. What about ethnic, race, and/or religious diversity? So a couple of things about that. We definitely include ethnic, race, and would like to include all of those different identifiers. I think you know, from a quantitative standpoint, it's really hard to find that type of data, unfortunately. So how we typically like to address that is through either partnership development or working with community groups, neighborhood groups, et cetera, that are already you know, working with different types of folks, diverse people in the community. So that we typically try to do through more of a partnership model. I would say if there are people or organizations, community leaders that you think that we should connect with, including yourself, just to let us know so we can follow up individually. I think it's, you know, in terms of the data, it's sometimes hard to find, and some data that isn't captured. Ella, I don't know if you have any other thoughts about that, just to address that piece.
Yeah, I think if it's specific to the actual vision, that it should be more explicit about ethnic, race, or religious diversity. That's a great point. And let's figure out ways that that feels right and reflects the survey responses and is a good aspiration for the future of Wrentham.
Great.
Looks like we're getting a lot of responses in, and no one has chatted any difficulties. So that's great. We didn't know it was going to work so well. Caroline, are you seeing those responses?
Those, yeah, looking great. So about
Okay.
half of us think that it's great, but you know, it still needs some work. Curious to hear from folks who feel like we need to go back to the drawing board. So if you all have any comments or ideas about what that means to you, to let us know directly in the chat. We'll make a note of it. And as a reminder, we'll be saving the chat, so we'll be able to go back into these notes to make edits as needed after this meeting. Awesome. Great. So our next question you'll see in the chat, you can see is about what do you like most about the draft division? And there are quite a bit of options here. But you can see one is Wrentham is a charming town. It's part of its downtown open spaces. It's a great place for its family. And it goes down through the different parts of the vision. So just take some time to take a look at it, what pops out at you and what you most like. Feel free to fill that out now and submit your answers so we can see your responses live. Melissa, thank you for your points about outreach. And if there are specific contacts there, would love to follow up directly with anybody you might know. So thank you for that, Melissa. And if you don't want to share with everybody, you can message me directly on your chat. Awesome. So we're seeing become more walkable and bikeable with sidewalks and trails, really trailing ahead. Good one. Wrentham is a charming town. That opening statement sounds like it's good. Yeah, so keep bringing in those responses. Would love to see what difference pops up for people. Appreciate everybody's participation on that one. Great. So we'll give it 10 more seconds. And we'll move on to the next piece. All right. Great, thank you for that. Appreciate that.
I just wanted to add that it's nice to see that there's kind of broad support along most of the different clauses, the different aspirations of the vision, maybe less so for encouraging diversity with a mix of housing options. So if you have particular concerns about that, please share those in the chat so that we know what the concerns are with that, or share it in your small group. And then I'll move on to the next.
Great. And our last question here is, what changes do you recommend? And this will be a little bit more of an open question. So take some time to think about that. You know, if you're a longtime resident, new resident, just work in Wrentham, you know, nothing too small to think about. You can also upvote any answers that people see that you like. So you can click a little up button. I think it might be a thumbs up that you can click to if you like to see that be elevated. So feel free to input that now. And while we're doing that, just wanted to open it back up to the Master Plan Committee to see if there are any other comments or notes that they wanted to make to the group while we're waiting. So if anybody else has any comments here, we can see here, try to broaden diversity topic at least a little bit as something that's coming up again. So definitely hearing that throughout this process tonight. Really appreciate that comment. Would love to see the addition of a goal to address traffic pattern of the downtown area to increase safety for both drivers and pedestrians. Thank you for that. Sidewalks and bike lanes on Creek Street. Yeah, and I think if there are specific asks, you know, for different intersections or different areas of town, that's definitely welcomed as we get to the more specific recommendations. That will be incredibly useful. Great. Just a quick reminder, in case people need to see the copy of the vision once again, Sasha put it back in the chat. So if you need to reference it one more time, it is there. So Sasha, thank you for that. And just wanted to open it up again to any of the master plan committee members for any comments here. So I see some more comments here about different areas of town, specific streets, etc. Melissa states here, I think there are creative ways to protect rural character while providing more affordable housing options besides just for builders. To protect the charm. Thank you, Melissa. Not the harm. I appreciate that edit there. Okay, great. And passing it back over to Ellen. As a reminder, again, you know, your submissions will be keeping those through Poll EV, so we'll have access to them after tonight. So those are definitely will be captured and summarized.
Great, thanks. And here's the info for Rachel. Again, if you want to email any further comments, although we'll capture the chat and poll everywhere, but email or call. And I'm so glad that worked. It was a fun little experiment with poll everywhere, and it actually worked. Better than the dress rehearsal. That's always a good thing. Okay, so the next segment of this meeting is key issues and opportunities. So we'll have a small group discussion in a few minutes. We'll break you up into small groups to identify anything that we haven't yet identified in the survey or in the vision. Are we missing anything? So to help inform that, we've done an analysis of existing conditions, and the survey provides so much insight into the lived experience and the knowledge that people bring to this process. But it can also be helpful to look at some facts and figures and have that kind of reflected back. Maybe you'll learn something. Maybe you'll learn something about your neighbor or about the history. And you know, you might be surprised by some of the census figures or the housing figures that we're about to show. So this is all to help inform the plan and help to inform the discussion that we'll have in a few minutes about if we're kind of missing any key issues or opportunities as we start designing our goals and actions on housing and economic development. So it's a town of a little less than 12,000 people. There was strong population growth between 1980 and 2000. So that line is going pretty steeply up, and then it's kind of slowed down since 2000. And according to MAPC's projections, that population growth is expected to stay low for the next couple of decades. That said, the population is getting older. So the chart here shows on top the number of households with a child is decreasing, and the number of households with a senior is increasing. So the number of seniors is expected to grow by about 1,000 people in the next 10 years, the horizon of this plan, resulting in almost 30% of the town's population being over the age of 65 by 2030. In terms of race and language, so we've talked about this a bit already, but Wrentham's population is almost 95% white compared to 82% in Plymouth County. So has a lot less racial diversity than the county overall. That said, more than 1 in 20 households in Wrentham, or 6%, speak a language other than English at home, mostly European languages. That's in Wrentham, not the county. In terms of income, the median household income is greater than $100,000 a year, but about 1 in 4 households are low income. That's defined as $78,000 a year for a family of 4 is considered low income. And between 350 and 800 people, this is all from the census, in Wrentham live below the poverty line. That's defined as $24,000 a year for a family of 4. And then when you dig into that a little bit, because it's a relatively small town, it's hard to find correlations exactly because the margin of error gets so big. But when you dig into where are the differences in income, you see this huge disparity shown here on the chart between incomes of households who rent and incomes of households who own. So the average income of a homeowner in Wrentham is almost $130,000 compared to a renting household, which is about $30,000 a year. In terms of education, more than 60% of residents have received an associate's degree or higher. So that's shown in the darker green. They have a college degree or a master's or a doctorate. And yet also about 20% have not received any college education. And then when combining that with some college, that's about 35% don't have a college degree. In terms of employment, this chart shows people who work in Wrentham, so like the jobs in the dark green, and the residents of Wrentham and where they work in the light green. So most jobs shown in the dark green are in food services up top here, education, and then retail. And when you compare that to the residents of Wrentham and where they work, you can see that lighter green is distributed over these different sectors more evenly. So residents of Wrentham work in a greater variety of sectors, including higher income sectors such as healthcare and professional services. And then when you dig more into those jobs in Wrentham, you see here's a chart of the sectors and then the number of employees in Wrentham in each of those sectors. And I've highlighted in green here those ones that are really big, where there's a lot of jobs in Wrentham. And 2 of those, accommodation and food services and retail, have among the lowest weekly wages. So that's shown over here on the right side of the chart. So you can see that accommodation and food services and retail trade, which have a lot of jobs in Wrentham, have among the lowest average weekly wage. So something just to consider as we're planning for the economic development and housing. And then to zoom in on housing, there are almost 4,000 housing units, and around 16% are renter occupied or rented. 13% of total units are subsidized, which means they're affordable housing. And the state has a goal of 10% of units per municipality being affordable housing. So Wrentham is meeting and exceeding that goal, although certainly can choose to exceed it further. And one reason to do so is the cost of housing. So this slide shows that about 2 out of 10 homeowners in Wrentham are cost burdened, and that's I think a census definition, but a nationally agreed upon definition of a household spending more than 30% of their income on housing. So 20% of households in Wrentham spend more than 1/3 of their income on their housing. And then comparing that to the renters, about half of all renters are cost burdened in Wrentham. Another consideration to get the lay of the land is climate change. So in terms of the sources of emissions in Wrentham, this map to the left is a great publicly accessible map, nationwide map that shows the annual household carbon footprint by zip code of every zip code in the nation. So Wrentham is outlined here in black. And you can see here that it's darker orange, which means it's a relatively high carbon footprint. And that's often the case in low density areas because of the transportation. So the bar chart on the right breaks down where that carbon is coming from in Wrentham, and most of it's from transportation, from having to drive around. The impacts of that climate change, and again, these are the impacts of international emissions, not just the emissions from Wrentham, include inland flooding, heat waves, severe storms, and drought. And in 2018, Wrentham went through another community planning process to develop a community resilience plan. So these hazards are outlined in that plan and are a good resource as we develop the master plan. And then, of course, this is all in this time of great suffering and challenge due to COVID. So the economic numbers and the housing numbers don't capture that quite yet. And MAPC has tried to figure out what are the impacts thus far and what will the impacts of COVID be. And certainly we need to keep this in mind as we think ahead. Basically, a lot of people are on unemployment. 20% of wage earners in Massachusetts, this is data from May, so it's, I'm sure, changed, have filed for unemployment. And certain sectors have been hard hit. And those sectors, including food preparation and retail, are the same sectors where there's a lot of jobs in Wrentham. So, you know, we can, it's pretty safe to assume that the unemployment from COVID has hit the jobs in Wrentham. And then looking at it spatially, this is a land use map. So this isn't planning. This is data from the assessor's office that just shows how land is already being used. So this isn't anything that we developed, we just put it on a map. So the yellow is residential, where homes are. The green is parks and protected open space. The purple is industry, there's a good amount of industry. Pink is commercial, which includes retail. And we added hash marks, the black hash marks, for, again, not what we've determined, but what the assessor has determined might be vacant and developable land. So another thing to consider as we're planning. So a lot of land around Route 1 and that land on the vacant land to the west of downtown there. So based on all of that information and the survey responses and your lived experience in Wrentham, we wanted to break out into discussion questions so that all of your ideas are captured, and as we, before we dig into housing and economic development further, we make sure we get a good understanding of all the key issues and opportunities. And since we're running a little bit behind schedule, you know, maybe we'll only have 10 minutes for breakout sessions, but I'll hand it over to Carolina to lead us into those.
Great. So we're going to do two questions, discussion questions, and the questions are here on the slide. Based on the existing conditions presented, is there anything you'd like to add about Wrentham's key issues and opportunities that wasn't captured by the survey? And I did want to note that we did have some questions in the chat that we can perhaps address either in a breakout or like at a later time. And if we do have time, we'd like to start focusing more and think about key issues and opportunities in regards to housing and economic development specifically, as this first phase is really focused on that piece. So in terms of discussion guidelines, we really want to make sure that this is a discussion. So we've spoken a lot tonight and had taken questions in the chat, but really want to encourage people to interact and, you know, if you want to show, turn your camera on, that sort of thing, that would be definitely welcome. And then listening for understanding. So listening for other people's comments or really thinking about different perspectives and respecting difference of opinion. So as we're having this discussion, not assuming that we need to, you know, agree on everything, but really think about what are some potential solutions. And then just as a reminder, we will take notes during this time. And each of the facilitators will hopefully be reporting out at least one, you know, finding or comment that was discussed at length during our breakouts. And then just as a reminder in terms of unmuting, if you are on a phone and you need to unmute yourself, you can do *6, enter *6, and you'll be able to do that and have a part of the discussion. Am I missing anything else, Ella?
No, great. So I think just to make sure we finish not too late after schedule, maybe we'll have breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. And Sasha from MAPC will send you to these breakout rooms. So if you've never done this before, you don't need to do anything. Just keep your Zoom on and you'll be sent to a breakout room, and a steering committee member will help facilitate the discussion and take notes. So there's nothing you need to do. Welcome back from your breakout rooms. Hopefully it all went well. Nice to see so many more videos on. Hey, everybody. Great. You might have missed some people. Some people don't always come back from breakout rooms. So we'd love to hear one main point from each breakout room. So let's start with Everett and George. Can you share a main theme from your breakout room?
I had two very active and informative people in my group, and they're both concerned with controlled future development of what's currently open space. I explained what I know from a planning board perspective about that, and then we got zoomed back into the general meeting.
Teleported. Okay, great. How about Alan?
Sorry. So our discussion mostly went around the balance between costing and the balance of, you know, very large homes being built over the past 20 or 30 years in these towns, and it's sort of locked out the old starter homes. And even the old starter homes have been transformed into non-starter homes. So it's it's a USA issue. It's not a Wrentham or a Massachusetts issue. I read some statistic the other day that the average house price in Mass went from $420,000 to $480,000 in 2 months over this summer. So it's going the wrong way.
Yeah.
So, and Melissa, who was in our chat room, put something on chat about transportation, so that we get cut off before we could talk about it.
Okay. I think we have Melissa's contact information earlier in the chat, but if not, Melissa, please send that on chat so we can follow up. Steve.
You already did that. It's already on the chat.
Okay, great.
Well, our group mentioned the fact that riding a bike on Creek Street is not a good idea. And that would be a big thing to help. And I tend to agree with them. I like to ride a bike once in a while, but I don't consider it safe on Creek Street. I don't know anything else, Daryl, that we should comment on?
Yes, there was one mention of what is affordable housing and the right housing mix, I guess, trying to define what affordable means and how it's applied to each demographic group.
Right, yeah, planning can be a complicated term. So affordable housing, there's like a technical term that it's subsidized housing, but also affordable can be used more generally to just mean, you know, housing that people can pay for reasonably. So there's kind of like a capital A affordable and a lowercase a affordable. So that's a great discussion. Okay, Jerry.
Okay, well, we started out by trying to figure out what the Celtics need to get over the hump next year, but from that, we went to, I think the comments centered around an appreciation for the opportunity to do this outreach to the citizens, and for them to have the opportunity to weigh in. I know from the previous effort 15 years ago, I'm not sure we were able to do this kind of thing, so this was good, and more particularly to be able to learn about from this outreach and opportunities. What's the art of the possible? What are the challenges? And the three things that I think I mentioned real quickly in the time we have was in regards to zoning, housing, and traffic.
Great. Jeff Spratt.
Yeah, so we also talked about sort of the stock and availability of affordable, meaning housing that people can afford, rental housing, because apparently that's non-existent right now or very hard to find. And then we also spent a little bit of time just talking about the success and promotion of businesses downtown and the importance of maintaining that landscape down there as well.
Great. Carolina?
We talked about similarly thinking about retail and different businesses and how coming out of COVID, how that revival will be and what needs to happen in order to maintain different retail businesses. We also talked about, again, similarly to Everett, how to protect our natural resources and build responsibly in a way that makes sense.
Thanks. Okay, and Ralph?
Interesting to see that, we had so many breakout groups, but they all tended to focus on different topics. We heard more comments regarding downtown Wrentham and how, it's not necessarily safe from a traffic point of view, and how do you balance the potential growth and change in business types with the impacts that might be created by that growth in businesses, particularly as it relates to traffic and pedestrians.
Okay, and Rachel?
Rachel was in my group.
Oh, okay, great. So is that everyone? Great. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, Ella.
Yeah, Jeff.
Excuse me, this is Jeff. Can you just again remind or encourage people that if they have any more thoughts to get them on the chat? I know Benjamin was in mid-sentence when we got, switched over to the main room.
Okay.
So if they can just go back to the chat and, anything that they didn't get a chance to state, if they could do that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so please add your comments to the chat. And the last slide just has Rachel's contact information again, so you can jot down her email address so that if you have, longer comments or want to take some more time preparing those, you don't have to rush with the chat as well. You can surely just email us. So as Carolina mentioned earlier, the project webpage has a button where you can enter your email address so that we can send you updates and notifications about other opportunities to be involved. And as you do that, check out all the information that's already on the project webpage. Here's Rachel's information. Please send us any thoughts as they come to mind. And not only your thoughts, but particularly how to, expand this pool of great ideas. So how can we reach out successfully? And Melissa, you sent some suggestions over the chat. That's great. But, how can we make sure to reach those that we haven't reached and get more voices involved? And the next phase is we'll take all of this feedback and revisit the vision. Seems like there was a lot of support for it, but some editing might need to be done. And then we're going to focus in on economic development and housing. So look out for more public outreach opportunities on those two topics. And thank you all so much for your time during this challenging time in our nation and in the world. So thank you so much and take care of yourselves.